Nobody looks at the Omega waitress. She is invisible, quiet, and seemingly harmless. But when the most powerful man on the West Coast was drugged and helpless, Serafina Cross dropped the act. In less than 60 seconds, she went from serving a $5,000 bottle of wine to breaking an assassin's arm with a serving tray. This is the story of the Ghost Battalion's last survivor, and the night she risked everything to save a king who didn't even know her name. The rain in Seattle doesn't wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. That was Serafina Cross's first thought as she looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows of Le Griffon, watching the relentless downpour blur the city lights into streaks of neon and gray. Serafina, known to the staff simply as Sarah, adjusted her apron. She was 24, small-framed, with messy chestnut hair tied back in a utilitarian bun. To the patrons of Le Griffon, she was furniture. She was an Omega, the lowest rung of the social ladder, genetically predisposed to be submissive, quiet, and easily overlooked. And that was exactly how she liked it. Being invisible was the only thing that kept her alive. Tonight, the restaurant was closed to the public. The velvet ropes were up, and the blinds were drawn. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged mahogany, and the distinct, coppery scent of aggression. Table 4 is ready for the wine service. The maitre d', a nervous human named Henri, whispered to her. His hands were shaking. Don't look them in the eye, Sarah. Just pour and leave. If they ask for anything, you nod and fetch the manager. Understood? Understood, Henri, Sarah said, her voice soft and unremarkable. She picked up the heavy silver tray, holding a decanter of 1,982 Chateau Mouton Rothschild, a $5,000 bottle of wine for a meeting that was worth billions in territory. At table 4, the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like the air pressure had dropped. 6 men sat around the circular oak table. At the head sat Declan Sterling. Declan was the alpha king of the Obsidian Ridge Pack, the largest coalition of wolves on the West Coast. He was 30 years old, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that struggled to contain the muscle in his shoulders. He had the kind of face that stopped traffic, sharp jawline, dark stubble, and eyes the color of cold steel. But tonight, those eyes were weary. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week, drumming his fingers on the tablecloth in a restless rhythm. Surrounding him were the 5 rivals. These were the alphas of the splinter packs, the ones who had been nipping at Declan's heels since his father died. To his left was Victor Krell, a man the size of a vending machine with a scar running through his left eyebrow. He led the Iron Claws, a pack known for brutality. Next to him sat Silas Vane, thin and reptilian, wearing wire-rimmed glasses that hid calculating eyes. Then there was Corinne Hart, the only woman among the rivals, dressed in blood-red silk. She smiled too much. Jackson Reed, a mercenary alpha with tattoos climbing up his neck, sat slouching, cleaning his fingernails with a jagged toothpick. And finally, Elias Blackwood, an older wolf with silver hair and a reputation for political backstabbing. They called this a peace summit. Sarah knew better. Wolves didn't gather in packs like this to talk peace. They gathered to decide who got the biggest piece of the carcass. Sarah approached the table, making her footsteps sound heavier than they naturally were. She kept her head down, projecting the perfect image of a frightened Omega. "The wine, gentlemen? Madam?" she murmured. "Pour it," Victor Krell grunted, not looking at her. "And make it quick. We have business." Declan Sterling didn't speak. He was watching Elias Blackwood across the table. "You said you had a proposal, Elias." "I'm here. My guards are outside as agreed. Let's hear it." Sarah moved around the table, pouring the dark red liquid into the crystal glasses. As the wine hit the air, her nose twitched. Her wolf, a dormant and suppressed creature deep inside her, pricked its ears. It wasn't the smell of the grapes. Beneath the notes of blackcurrant and cedar, there was something else. Something faint, sweet, and acrid. It smelled like almonds soaked in gasoline. Wolfsbane. And not just any wolfsbane, this was a concentrated, distinct strain used by the hunters in the Eastern Bloc. Sarah paused for a fraction of a second behind Declan's chair. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If she spoke, she died. An Omega, interrupting an Alpha summit, was a capital offense. If she did nothing, the Alpha King, the only thing holding the West Coast together, would be dead in 5 minutes. "Is there a problem, girl?" Corinne Hart asked, her voice like shattered glass. Sarah froze. She poured the last drop into Declan's glass. "No, ma'am. Just admiring the vintage." "Leave us," Declan commanded. His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated in Sarah's chest. He reached for the glass. Sarah stepped back, clutching the silver tray to her chest. Her instincts were screaming at her. Run, get out, survive. But as she backed away toward the kitchen, she saw Silas Vane glance at the clock on the wall. Then he looked at Jackson Reed and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It wasn't just a poisoning. It was an ambush. Declan lifted the glass. "To the truce," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "To the king," Elias Blackwood replied, a smirk touching his lips. Declan drunk. Sarah stopped at the kitchen swing door. She couldn't leave. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the exhaustion in Declan's eyes, or perhaps it was simply that she was tired of watching monsters win, but she planted her feet. She watched as Declan swallowed. He set the glass down. 3 seconds passed. Declan frowned. He touched his throat. 5 seconds. His hand flew to his tie, loosening it. His steel-colored eyes went wide, the pupils blowing out until his eyes were entirely black. "What?" Declan choked out, trying to stand. His legs gave way, and he crashed back into his heavy chair. "Now!" Victor Krell roared. The pretense of civilization shattered instantly. The chaos that erupted in Le Griffon was deafening. Victor Krell flipped the heavy oak table with one hand, sending crystal and china crashing to the floor. The sound was like a bomb going off. Declan Sterling, the most powerful alpha on the coast, was paralyzed. The neurotoxin in the wine was fast-acting. It didn't kill him, but it severed the connection between his brain and his muscles. He slumped sideways, sliding off his chair, his breathing ragged and shallow. He tried to shift, to call upon his wolf, but the wolfsbane burned through his veins like acid, suppressing the change. "Cut his head off before the guards get in!" Silas Vane shouted, pulling a jagged combat knife from his jacket. "The guards are already dead," Jackson Reed laughed, kicking Declan in the ribs. The Alpha King groaned, a sound of pure frustration and pain. "My boys took care of them in the parking lot." Sarah watched from the shadows of the kitchen doorway. The sensible part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive for 5 years while running from her own past, told her to bolt out the back exit. She could be in her beat-up Honda Civic in 30 seconds. She could be out of the state by morning. But then she saw Corinne Hart step forward. The woman in the red dress pulled a stiletto, not a shoe, but a thin, needle-like blade, and aimed it right for Declan's eye. "Look at him," Corinne sneered. "The king of Obsidian Ridge, helpless as a pup." Declan looked up, his vision blurring. He saw the ceiling spinning. He saw the faces of the people he had tried to make peace with, distorted by his own failing nervous system. He gritted his teeth, trying to force his arm to move, but it felt like lead. He was going to die here, on the floor of a restaurant, betrayed. No, the thought wasn't Declan's. It was Sarah's. The tray in her hand was solid sterling silver, heavy, expensive. Without a word, Sarah stepped out of the kitchen. She didn't shift. She didn't growl. She moved with a fluid, terrifying silence that no Omega should possess. She calculated the trajectory in a microsecond. Distance, 20 feet. Windage, none. Target, Corinne Hart, right wrist. Sarah spun, using the momentum of her hips, and hurled the heavy silver tray like a discus. It flew through the air with a deadly whoosh. Crack. The edge of the tray slammed into Corinne's wrist with the force of a sledgehammer. The sound of breaking bone echoed through the room. Corinne screamed, dropping the needle blade, and clutched her shattered arm. "What the hell?" Victor Krell spun around, his eyes scanning the room for a threat. He expected a bodyguard. He expected a wolf. Instead, he saw the waitress. Sarah stood there, her hands empty now, her posture changing. The slump was gone, her shoulders rolled back, her chin lifted. The fearful look in her eyes had vanished, replaced by a cold, vacuous focus that was far more terrifying than anger. "You dropped something," Sarah said. Her voice wasn't soft anymore. It was flat, commanding. "The waitress?" Jackson Reed barked a laugh, though he looked confused. "You missed a spot, sweetheart. Get back in the kitchen before I rip your throat out." "5 of you," Sarah said, walking forward. She didn't rush. She walked with a predator's gait, heel to toe, silent. She picked up a steak knife from a fallen table setting, against one drugged man. "It's embarrassing, really." "Kill her, Elias," Victor growled. "I'll finish Sterling." Elias Blackwood, the older wolf, shifted partially, his claws extended, and he lunged at Sarah. He was fast for his age, an alpha with decades of combat experience. He aimed a backhand swipe at her head that would have decapitated a normal human. Sarah didn't even blink. She ducked, Not a scramble, but a precise drop of her center of gravity. Elias's claws whistled through the air where her head had been a millisecond before. Before Elias could recover, Sarah drove the steak knife upward. She didn't aim for the chest, too much bone. She aimed for the soft spot under the armpit, where the nerve cluster met the shoulder. She twisted the blade and withdrew it in one motion. Elias howled, his arm instantly going dead as the nerves were severed. Sarah used his momentum against him, grabbing his good arm and pivoting. She threw the 200-pound man over her hip, slamming him onto the table covered in broken glass. Silence fell over the room. It lasted only a heartbeat. Declan, struggling to keep his eyes open from the floor, watched through a haze. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The scent coming off the waitress. It wasn't fear. It wasn't the sweet, milky scent of an omega. It was the scent of ozone and old blood. "Who are you?" Silas Vane hissed, stepping back. Sarah spun the steak knife in her hand, the blade catching the dim light. She positioned herself between the 4 remaining standing alphas and the fallen king. "I'm the one taking out the trash," she said. Victor Krell roared, fully shifting into his wolf form, a massive, black-furred beast the size of a pony. He didn't care about technique. He charged, jaws snapping, intending to crush her small body in one bite. Sarah didn't have the strength to match a shifted alpha. If he hit her, she was dead. She waited. The giant wolf leaped. Sarah dropped to her knees and slid across the polished wooden floor, right underneath the leaping wolf. As she slid, she reached up. She didn't use the knife this time. She had grabbed a corkscrew from her apron pocket, a heavy-duty, T-handle wine opener. As the wolf passed over her, she drove the corkscrew into the sensitive, soft pad of his rear paw and twisted. Victor yelped a high-pitched dog sound and crashed into the bar, unable to put weight on his back leg. He thrashed, knocking over rows of expensive liquor, turning the floor into a sea of glass and alcohol. Sarah scrambled to her feet, grabbing a bottle of high-proof vodka from the debris. "2 down," she stated, breathing hard now. She looked at Jackson and Silas. "Who's next?" But Jackson Reed wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight on the balls of her feet, left hand guarding her neck. "That stance," Jackson muttered, his face paling. "That's not Omega training. That's the Ghost Battalion. But they were wiped out 10 years ago." Sarah's eyes narrowed. A flash of pain crossed her face, quickly buried. "You talk too much." She glanced back at Declan. He was conscious, but barely. His silver eyes met hers. In them, she saw a plea. Not for his life, but for vengeance. "Can you walk?" she asked him, not looking away from the killers. "No," Declan rasped, blood trickling from his lip. "Fine," Sarah said, tightening her grip on the vodka bottle. "Then I'll have to carry you. But first," she looked at the remaining rivals. "I need to clear the room." The silence in Le Griffon was heavy, broken only by the whimpering of Victor Krell, who was still thrashing in the broken glass behind the bar. Jackson Reed, the mercenary alpha with the neck tattoos, had stopped moving. He held his combat knife loosely, his eyes locked on Sarah's feet. He wasn't looking at her face. He was watching her balance. He had seen that stance before, the weight perfectly distributed, the knees bent at a 45-degree angle, the utter lack of wasted energy. "The Ghost Battalion," Jackson repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "The Black Ops Division of the Northern Coalition. They were liquidated, burned to ash in the coup of 2018. Sarah didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't have the luxury of a history lesson. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but her hands were steady. She gripped the neck of the vodka bottle until her knuckles turned white. "You're seeing ghosts, Jackson," Silas Vane hissed. Silas hadn't noticed the stance. He only saw a small, fragile Omega holding a bottle of liquor. He saw prey. "She got lucky. She's nothing," Silas lunged. It was a cowardly attack. He didn't come from the front. He feinted left, kicking a heavy oak chair toward her to break her concentration, then sprinted to her right flank, his serrated knife aiming for her kidney. Time seemed to slow down for Sarah. She didn't try to block the chair. She stepped into it, using her shin to check the wood, absorbing the impact and using the momentum to pivot. As Silas closed the distance, sneering, Sarah didn't retreat. She uncorked the vodka bottle with her thumb, a movement so subtle it was almost invisible. She didn't swing the bottle. She splashed it. A wave of high-proof alcohol hit Silas square in the eyes. The alpha screamed, clawing at his face as the alcohol burned his corneas. He stumbled back, blinded momentarily. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the votive candle from the center of the overturned table, the small flame still flickering miraculously in the chaos. "Fire!" she whispered, her voice devoid of emotion. She threw the candle at Silas. The alcohol-soaked front of his expensive silk shirt caught instantly. A whoosh of blue and orange flame erupted across his chest. Wolves are apex predators, but they have a primal, genetic fear of fire. Silas panic-shifted. His bones cracked and reshaped, shredding his burning clothes, but the fire clung to his fur. He rolled on the ground, howling, effectively out of the fight. That left Jackson Reed. The mercenary looked at the burning wolf, then back at Sarah. He looked at the unconscious Elias, the crippled Victor, and the screaming Corinne. He sheathed his knife. "I don't get paid enough to fight a ghost," Jackson muttered. He took a step back, raising his hands. "I'm walking away. You want to drag the king out? Be my guest. But the patrols will be here in 3 minutes." Sarah didn't trust him, but she couldn't fight him. Not now. Her adrenaline was fading, and the fatigue was crashing in. She was an Omega. Her physical reserves were a fraction of an Alpha's. Her muscles were already screaming, trembling with the aftershocks of the exertion. "Go," she commanded. Jackson turned and bolted out the service entrance. Sarah dropped the bottle. She turned to Declan. The Alpha King was a dead weight on the floor. His skin was gray, sweat beading on his forehead. The neurotoxin was shutting down his respiratory system. If she didn't get him out now, the suffocation would kill him before the assassins returned. "Come on, Your Majesty," she gritted out, kneeling beside him. "Don't die on me. I can't explain a dead king to the manager." She grabbed his arm and draped it over her shoulders. He was massive, easily 6'4" and 240 pounds of dense muscle. Sarah was 5'4". She gritted her teeth, engaging her core, and heaved. She couldn't lift him. He was too heavy. "Damn it," she hissed. Declan's eyelids fluttered. He looked at her, his vision swimming. He couldn't speak, but he could smell her. Through the smoke and blood he smelled lavender and gunpowder. The scent was intoxicating. It anchored him. "Push," he told his legs. "Push." With a groan that sounded like tearing metal, Declan forced his paralyzed legs to move. It wasn't walking. It was a stumble. He put 80% of his weight on Sarah, and she buckled under it, her knees hitting the floor hard. "Get up!" she yelled at him, her voice cracking. "Move your feet, Alpha!" She dug her fingers into his ribs, finding a pressure point she knew would trigger a reflex. Declan gasped, his body jerking upright. Together, they formed a clumsy, 3-legged beast. They stumbled through the kitchen, knocking over racks of pots and pans. The clang-clatter echoed like alarm bells. They burst out the back door into the alleyway, just as the front doors of the restaurant were kicked in by the rivals' reinforcements. The rain hit them instantly, a freezing, relentless Seattle deluge. It soaked Sarah's uniform in seconds, plastering her hair to her face. "My car," she panted, pointing to a rusted 10-year-old Honda Civic parked next to the dumpsters. "We have to. Get to the car." She dragged the King of the West Coast toward the heap of junk metal that was her only lifeline. Getting Declan Sterling into the passenger seat of a 2-door Honda Civic was an exercise in geometry and desperation. Sarah had to recline the seat all the way back just to fit his legs. When she finally slammed the door shut, she slumped against the wet metal for 2 seconds, hyperventilating. What have I done? She had just assaulted 5 high alphas. She had kidnapped the king. Her face was likely on a private server somewhere, being forwarded to every bounty hunter in the hemisphere. Her life of invisibility was over. She scrambled into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered. Chug, chug, chug. Silence. "No, no, no," Sarah pleaded, smacking the steering wheel. "Not today, Betsy. Please, not today." She tried again. The engine whined, coughed, and finally roared to life with a sound like a lawnmower choking on rocks. Sarah threw it into reverse, tires screeching on the wet asphalt, and peeled out of the alley just as 2 black SUVs turned the corner, their headlights blinding in the rain. She didn't take the highway. The highway would be watched. She took the surface streets, weaving through the industrial district of Sodo. She drove with the lights off, relying on the ambient glow of the street lamps and her own heightened night vision. Every pair of headlights in the rearview mirror made her heart stop. Beside her, Declan was making a sound, a low, rattling wheeze. "Hang on," she said, her voice trembling. I'm taking you to the stacks. They won't look for you there. They think you're too good for the stacks." The stacks was the derogatory name for the shipping container housing projects on the edge of the port. It was an unregulated zone, a place where undocumented shifters, rogue wolves, and humans with nowhere else to go lived in stacked metal boxes. It was a place of poverty, rust, and anonymity. Sarah drove for 20 minutes, her knuckles white on the wheel. Finally, she pulled into a muddy lot surrounded by towering stacks of rusted containers. She parked in the shadows of Block C. "We're here," she whispered. Getting him up the metal stairs to her second-level unit was harder than the restaurant. Declan was completely unconscious now. She had to drag him, step by agonizing step, the metal grating scraping against his expensive Italian suit. She kicked her door open and hauled him inside. Her apartment was tiny, a single room with a kitchenette and a mattress on the floor. It was clean, but bare. No photos on the walls, no personal mementos, just survival gear disguised as poverty. She dumped Declan onto her mattress. "Okay," she breathed, locking the 3 deadbolts on the door and pulling the blackout curtains shut. "Okay, triage." She turned on a single lamp. Declan looked terrible. His skin was clammy, and the veins in his neck were black and bulging. The wolfsbane was spreading toward his heart. Sarah ran to her kitchenette. She didn't go for a first aid kit. She went to a loose floorboard under the sink. She pried it up with a butter knife and pulled out a heavy, canvas-wrapped bundle. She unrolled it on the floor. Inside were vials of herbs, dried roots, and silver needles. This wasn't Waitress equipment. This was a field medic's kit from the war. She grabbed a jar of dried yellow paste ground sulfur and crushed Street John's wort. It was an old folk remedy, painful but effective at drawing out toxins. She knelt beside Declan. "I have to take your shirt off," she muttered, her hands shaking slightly. She unbuttoned his soaked dress shirt, peeling the wet fabric away from his chest. Even in his dying state, the man was breathtaking. His chest was a landscape of muscle and old scars, a map of battles fought and won. But right now, the center of his chest was turning purple. "This is going to hurt," she told the unconscious man. Sarah took her steak knife, the one she still had in her apron, and held it over the flame of her stove burner until the tip glowed red. She returned to him. She had to make an incision to let the poison drain. She pressed the hot blade against the vein in his shoulder. Declan's body arched off the mattress, a guttural roar ripping from his throat. His eyes flew open, black and wild. "Hold still," Sarah shouted, using her body weight to pin his good arm down. "I'm saving your life, you idiot." She smeared the yellow paste into the fresh cut. It sizzled. Declan thrashed, his wolf surfacing in a panic. He backhanded her. It was a flailing, uncoordinated strike, but it connected with her shoulder, sending her flying across the small room. She hit the wall with a thud that knocked the wind out of her. Sarah gasped, clutching her shoulder. She scrambled back up instantly. "Hit me again and I leave you to die," she snarled, crawling back to him. Declan blinked. The pain was receding, replaced by a dull throb. The blackness in his veins was retreating, the color returning to his face. He looked at the woman hovering over him. She was wet, disheveled, smelling of cheap soap and old fear, but her hands were steady as she bandaged his wound. He focused on her face. He saw a small scar on her chin. He saw eyes the color of amber, flecked with green. "You," Declan rasped, his voice sounding like gravel rubbing together. "You're the waitress." "I'm the waitress," Sarah confirmed, tying the bandage tight. "And you're heavy." Declan lay back, his head spinning. He looked around the tin box of an apartment. He looked at the field medic kit on the floor. He looked at the way she held herself protective, alert, guarding the door. "Waitresses don't know how to treat concentrated wolfsbane poisoning," Declan whispered. "And they don't know how to break an alpha's arm with a serving tray." Sarah sat back on her heels, wiping blood from her hands onto her apron. The adrenaline was gone, leaving her hollow and terrified. She looked at the Alpha King, the man who represented everything she had spent 5 years running from. "I watched a cooking show," she lied, her voice flat. Declan let out a weak, dry chuckle that turned into a cough. He reached out, his hand trembling, and grabbed her wrist. His grip was weak, but the electric shock that jolted through them both was undeniable. "Who are you?" he demanded, his eyes searching hers. "And don't lie to me, or I'll have you arrested for kidnapping a king." Sarah looked down at his hand on her wrist. She could pull away. She could run now, while he was too weak to follow, but she didn't. "My name is Serafina," she said softly. "And I'm the reason you're not dead. That's all you need to know." Declan's eyes began to close, the exhaustion taking over. But before he slipped into unconsciousness, he murmured one last thing. The Ghost Battalion. They wore a symbol, a black crescent. Sarah stiffened. She instinctively pulled her left sleeve down, covering the faded tattoo on her forearm. "Go to sleep, Your Majesty," she whispered. "Tomorrow, everyone will be hunting us." She stood up and walked to the window, peering out through the crack in the curtains at the rain-slicked stacks. She was safe for tonight, but she knew the truth. The war she had fled had finally found her. The rain on the corrugated steel roof of the shipping container didn't sound like rain. It sounded like a drum roll, a relentless rhythmic pounding that vibrated through the thin metal walls and into the bones of the two people inside. It was 3:17 a.m. Declan Sterling woke with a gasp. The air in the tiny room was hot, stiflingly so. He felt as though his veins were filled with liquid lead. The wolfsbane was leaving his system, but it was fighting a retreating battle, burning every nerve ending as it dissipated. He tried to sit up, but a hand pressed firm against his chest. "Don't," a voice whispered from the dark. "You'll rip the stitches." Declan blinked, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The only light came from a street lamp outside, filtering through the gap in the blackout curtains, casting a sliver of amber illumination across the room. Sarah was sitting on a plastic crate beside the mattress, her back straight, a heavy iron skillet resting on her knees like a shield. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were fixed on the door, unblinking. "You're awake," she stated, not looking at him. "Where?" Declan's voice was a wreck. He cleared his throat, tasting copper. "Where are we?" "Sector 4. The stacks. Container C-19, Sarah recited, her tone clipping the ends of the words. It was a military report, not a conversation. "It's off the grid. No cameras. No patrols. Just rats and rust." Declan looked around. The room was a paradox. It was the home of a person who owned nothing, yet everything in it was placed with surgical precision. The boots by the door were aligned perfectly. The single cup on the counter was centered on a napkin. It was a cell, stripped of personality to ensure mobility. He looked back at her. In the dim light, the waitress uniform looked ridiculous on her. It was a costume that didn't fit the woman underneath. "You saved me," Declan said. It was a statement, but it carried the weight of a question. "Why?" Sarah finally turned to look at him. The fatigue under her eyes was heavy, purple bruises against pale skin. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because I was tired of cleaning up blood." "Liar," Declan murmured. He tried to push himself up again, ignoring her earlier command. Pain flared in his shoulder where she had cut him to drain the poison, but he gritted his teeth and leaned back against the cold metal wall. He needed to see her, really see her. "Who taught you to fight like that?" he asked. "That wasn't self-defense, Serafina. That was an execution protocol." Sarah stood up. She moved to the tiny kitchenette and poured water from a plastic jug into a cracked mug. She brought it to him. "Drink." Declan took the mug. Their fingers brushed. The reaction was instantaneous. For an alpha, the touch of a compatible mate is usually a spark. This was not a spark. It was a sledgehammer. Declan felt a jolt of possessiveness so violent it made his wolf growl low in his chest. The scent he had smelled earlier, lavender and gunpowder, flooded his senses, drowning out the smell of the damp room. Sarah pulled her hand back as if burned. She stepped away, retreating into the shadows. She felt it too, the pull. The terrifying biological gravity that told her this man, this king, was hers. "I know who you are," Declan said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the command of a king. "I saw the tattoo before you covered it, the black crescent." Sarah stiffened. She turned her back to him, staring at the bolted door. "The Ghost Battalion was a myth," she said quietly. "Propaganda created by the Northern Coalition to scare the Southern Alphas. My father fought them," Declan countered. "He said they were Omegas, genetic anomalies. Omegas with the aggression of Alphas and the stealth of prey. They were assassins who could walk into a room, kill a target, and be dismissed as furniture by the guards." He paused, watching the tension in her shoulders. "He said they were all executed 10 years ago. Every last one." Sarah remained silent for a long time. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading into the storm. "They missed one," she whispered. The confession hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Declan looked at the woman, this dangerous, broken weapon hiding in a waitress's apron. He should be terrified. She was a trained regicide specialist, but all he felt was an overwhelming need to stand between her and the door. "Why hide?" Declan asked softly. "You could have been a warlord. You could have run a pack." Sierra turned, and for the first time, her mask slipped. Her face wasn't hard anymore. It was haunted. "I didn't want to be a warlord," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to serve coffee. I wanted to pay rent. I wanted to forget the things my hands have done." She looked down at her hands, turning them over. "But you ruined that. You and your arrogance, walking into a trap without a backup plan." "I had a backup plan," Declan said dryly. "What was it? Dying?" "No. My backup plan was relying on the greed of my enemies. I didn't expect them to unite." He winced, shifting his leg. "I owe you a life debt, Serafina. In our laws, that means—" "I don't care about your laws," she snapped, the soldier returning. "I care about survival. And right now, your laws are going to get us killed." She walked over to the window and peeled back the tape she had placed over a crack in the glass. She peered out into the rain-slicked yard of the container park. Her body went rigid. "Damn it," she hissed. "What?" Declan demanded, trying to stand. "Lights," she said, stepping away from the window and grabbing the iron skillet again. Tactical flashlights, sweeping the yard. 3 distinct beams, moving in a sweeping pattern. She looked at him, her amber eyes blazing. They found the car. The transition was immediate. The woman who had been trembling with traumatic memories vanished. In her place stood the ghost. Sarah moved through the tiny apartment with a speed that blurred in the low light. She didn't panic. She didn't rush. She flowed. "Can you stand?" she asked, kicking the mattress away to reveal a hidden hatch in the floor of the container. "I can fight," Declan growled, forcing his body to obey. The wolfsbane made his limbs feel heavy, but his alpha strength was returning. He stood, swaying slightly, towering over her in the cramped space. "No fighting," Sarah ordered. She reached under the sink and pulled out a bottle of bleach and a bottle of ammonia. "We are compromised. We are outnumbered. We evade." "There are 3 of them," Declan said, sniffing the air. "I smell wet dog and cheap leather. Mercenaries. If there are 3 visible, there are 2 on the roof and 1 covering the exit," Sierra corrected him. "Standard sweep and clear." She poured the bleach into a bucket near the door. Then she looked at Declan. "Cover your nose and mouth. Now." Declan ripped a strip of fabric from his ruined shirt and tied it around his face. He watched, fascinated and horrified, as she poured the ammonia into the bucket. "Chloramin gas." "Go!" She pointed to the floor hatch. Declan squeezed through the hole. It dropped down into the container below an empty unit she must have prepared as an escape route. He landed in the dark, looking up. Sarah didn't follow immediately. She grabbed the bucket of reacting chemicals and placed it directly in front of the door. Then she took a piece of fishing line from her pocket, tied it to the bucket's handle, and tied the other end to the doorknob. She dropped through the hatch and pulled the metal grate shut above them, locking it from the inside. "Move," she whispered. They were in the container below now. It was pitch black. Sarah took his hand. Her palm was rough, calloused, and warm. She led him through the dark like she could see in infrared. Above them, they heard the heavy thud, thud, thud of boots on the metal stairs. Declan held his breath. Click. The sound of a lock being picked. Creak. The door upstairs opened. "Clear left," a voice shouted upstairs. "Clear cough. Cough." The shouting turned into violent, wet retching. The bucket had tipped, flooding the small upper room with toxic gas. "Gas. Gas. Fall back." Panic ensued above them. Heavy boots scrambled. Someone fell down the stairs. "Amateurs," Sierra whispered in the dark. She didn't stop. She led Declan to the back of the lower container. She pushed against the wall. In a concealed panel swung open a cut she had made in the steel with a blowtorch months ago, hidden behind a stack of pallets outside. They slipped out into the cold, driving rain of the Seattle night. They were in the maze of the stacks, now narrow alleyways created by walls of rusted steel containers, rising 4 stories high on either side. It was a labyrinth of shadows. "We need to get to the shipyard docks," Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I have a boat." "You have a boat?" Declan asked, wiping rain from his eyes. "Do you have a jet too?" "Focus, Alpha." They moved through the alleyways. Declan was impressed. She moved heel to toe, rolling her feet so she made no sound in the puddles. She checked every corner before turning. She was leading him, protecting him, And for the first time in his life, the Alpha King felt safe. It was a bruising blow to his ego, but a balm to his soul. Suddenly, Sierra stopped. She threw her arm out, slamming it into Declan's chest to halt him. A red laser dot appeared on the wet metal wall inches from Declan's nose. Sniper, Sarah breathed. Block B roof, 400 yards. She didn't wait. She grabbed Declan by the lapels of his suit and threw him backward, just as a bullet cracked through the air where his head had been. The sound of the shot echoed through the metal canyons a split second later. They brought a sniper? Declan roared, his anger finally boiling over. This wasn't a gang hit. This was a paramilitary operation. Move! Sarah yelled. They scrambled behind a stack of crates. The laser danced around them, searching. We're pinned, Declan said, pressing his back against the cold steel. He has the high ground. If we step out, he takes my head off. Sarah looked at the crates. She looked at the container wall next to them. She looked at the heavy crane looming above the sniper's position in the distance. She reached into her boot and pulled out a flare gun. You have a flare gun? Declan asked, incredulous. I live in a shipping yard. It's a safety requirement, she said, cracking the barrel and loading a red shell. I need you to draw his fire. Declan stared at her. Excuse me? I need him to look at you for 2 seconds. Can you give me 2 seconds? I'm the king of the West Coast, not a decoy, Declan snapped. Right now, you're a target. Be a loud one. Declan looked at her. Her face was wet with rain, her hair plastered to her skull, her eyes fierce and calculating. She was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. Fine, Declan growled. He took a deep breath. He channeled his alpha energy, the aura of command that could force lesser wolves to their knees. He stepped out from behind the crates, fully into the open alleyway, and let out a roar that shook the rain from the air. It was a challenge, a primal scream of defiance. The red dot snapped onto his chest. Thump. Sarah didn't fire at the sniper. She fired straight up, but at an angle. The flare streaked through the night sky, a burning red comet. It didn't hit the sniper. It hit the operator's cabin of the massive, rusted shipyard crane directly above the sniper's position on the roof. The flare smashed through the glass of the cabin. The old, grease-stained interior caught fire instantly. But that wasn't the plan. The sudden flash of red light blinded the sniper's night vision scope. A whiteout. My eyes. The sniper screamed from the rooftop, the sound carrying over the wind. Run, Sarah commanded. She didn't run away from the sniper. She ran toward the building he was on. What are you doing? Declan yelled, sprinting to keep up with her. He's blind for 10 seconds, Sarah shouted back. We aren't running away. We're going up. I'm not leaving a sniper behind us. Declan grinned. His wolf howled in approval. She wasn't fleeing. She was hunting. They reached the base of the container stack. There was a maintenance ladder. Sarah hit it first, climbing with the agility of a spider. Declan followed, his strength returning with the surge of adrenaline. They reached the roof in seconds. The sniper, a man in black tactical gear, was rubbing his eyes, his rifle discarded on the wet roof. He was trying to clear his vision. He never saw them coming. Sarah didn't kill him. She swept his legs out from under him before he could reach for his sidearm. He hit the roof hard. Before he could scramble up, Declan was there. The Alpha King grabbed the mercenary by the throat and lifted him off the ground, dangling him over the edge of the 4-story drop. Who sent you? Declan snarled, his eyes flashing black. Give me a name. The sniper clawed at Declan's hand, choking. No one. Just a contract. Open contract. Who signed it? Declan squeezed tighter. Vane, the sniper gagged. Silas Vane. He put a $10 million bounty on your head. Open to all guilds. Declan pulled the man back and threw him onto the roof. Run. Tell Silas Vane I'm coming for him. The sniper scrambled away, terrified, disappearing down the fire escape. Declan turned to Sarah. She was standing by the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. 10 million, Sarah mused. I should have turned you in. Declan walked over to her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a charged electric tension between them. He stood close, shielding her from the wind with his body. You could have, he said, but you didn't. He reached out and touched a wet strand of hair on her cheek. This time, she didn't pull away. We have to go, she whispered, her voice breathless. Silas Vane won't stop. Let him come, Declan said, his voice low and dangerous. He just made the mistake of giving me a general. Sarah looked up at him. I'm not your general, Declan. I'm a waitress. Not anymore, Declan said. The waitress died in that restaurant. You're the ghost now, and the ghost belongs to me. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape began to ebb, replaced by the bone-deep chill of the Seattle waterfront. The rain finally stopped, leaving the world slick and reflecting the amber glow of the distant city lights. Sarah led Declan down a rusted maintenance ladder to the water's edge, where the black water lapped against the pilings with a greasy, rhythmic slap. Tucked behind a rotting pier, hidden under a tarp that looked like trash, was her escape vessel. It wasn't a yacht. It wasn't a fishing boat. It was a Zodiac Hurricane, a military-grade, rigid-hulled inflatable with twin 200 horsepower engines painted matte black. It was a smuggler's boat, a ghost ship for a ghost soldier. "Get in," Sarah commanded, tossing the tarp aside. Declan stepped onto the rubber gunwale, his suit ruined, his body battered, but his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. He watched as Sarah checked the fuel lines with practiced efficiency. She was shivering now, the cold finally piercing through her adrenaline. He reached out, grabbing a heavy wool blanket from the storage locker, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She flinched, her hand darting toward her knife before she recognized him. "Easy," Declan murmured. "The war is over for tonight." "The war has just started," Sarah corrected him, her voice tight. "Silas Vane failed. He'll go to ground. He'll rally the other families. By dawn, every mercenary from Anchorage to San Diego will have my face on their dashboard." She turned the key. The engines purred to life, a low, throaty rumble that vibrated through the hull. Declan sat on the bench seat, watching her steer them out into the dark waters of Puget Sound. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she didn't blink. She looked small against the vastness of the dark water, yet she was the most dangerous thing in the bay. "Why didn't you let me die?" Declan asked, his voice barely audible over the engines. "You hate the hierarchy. You hate alphas. You could have let the system eat itself." Sarah didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning for patrol boats. "I don't hate alphas," she said softly. "I hate bullies. And 5 against 1. That's just bad math." Declan laughed a dry, rasping sound. He moved closer to her at the helm. The pull of the bond was settling now, no longer a frantic shock, but a steady, warm hum in his chest. It was undeniable. The king had found his queen in the wreckage of a failed assassination. "You can't go back to Le Griffon," Declan said. "You can't go back to the stacks. You have nowhere left to hide, Serafina." Sarah tightened her grip on the throttle. She knew he was right. Her life of anonymity was ash. "So what happens now?" she asked, finally looking at him. Declan looked at the city skyline approaching the kingdom that had tried to kill him. He looked at the woman who had saved him with a steak knife and a flare gun. "Now," Declan said, a dark promise curling his lip. "We go to the Obsidian Ridge. We regroup. And then, we hunt them down. Not as a king and his subject." He placed his hand over hers on the wheel. "But as partners." Sarah looked at his hand, then up into his steel-gray eyes. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't see a threat. She saw a future. She pushed the throttle forward. The boat surged, the nose lifting out of the water, cutting a white path through the Black Sea toward the city. "Hang on, Alpha," she whispered. "It's going to be a bumpy ride." And that is where the official record ends. The police report from that night states that a gas leak caused the disturbance at the shipping yard. The bodies of the mercenaries were never found. Le Griffon burned down 2 days later in a mysterious electrical fire, destroying all evidence of the meeting at Table 4. But in the underground world, the rumors persist. They say Declan Sterling didn't just survive the coup, he was reborn. They say he walks with a shadow now, a woman with no past, who moves like smoke and fights like a demon. The peace summit was meant to end the king's reign. Instead, it gave him the one weapon he was missing, a queen who knows how to kill. The rivals wanted a war. They got one. And this time, the prey is hunting the predators. What a ride, right? This story reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one serving the drinks. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the ghost of Le Griffon and want to hear the full tactical breakdown of how Sarah dismantled 5 alphas, hit that like button right now. It helps the algorithm find more stories like this. And I have a question for you. If you were Sarah, would you have saved the king or let the rivals take him out? Let me know your theory in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss part 2 of the investigation where we track down Silas Vane. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.
Hi, my name is Mountain Confessions, the owner and manager of Mountain Confessions. After watching the video, 5 rivals attacked the Alpha King in a restaurant. The Omega Waitress's hidden skill shocked Eva. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stood out to me most was the theme of hidden strength. The story reminds us that people are often capable of much more than others expect, and that courage can show up in the most surprising moments. It also explores the idea that true character is revealed when a challenge appears without warning. One gentle lesson I took from it is not to underestimate people based on appearances or circumstances. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks has abilities no one saw coming. What was your favorite moment in the story? And did the waitress's actions change the way you viewed her character? Maybe there's a small reminder here to give people a chance to show who they really are, and to have confidence in strengths that may not always be visible. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, feel free to like or subscribe. Thanks for watching and spending a little time with us today.